I'd say that there isn't an issue with compliance right now, because right now the law doesn't require you to do anything. Somebody who's keeping an AR-15 is not actually breaking the law right now. And the government has actually been saying, hold on to your gun. Don't, because we're coming with this buyback scheme. Of course, they haven't actually, there's been sort of the babyest of steps towards it. And the likelihood that they actually have it lined up and ready to go by the deadline here is pretty poor. But there is no reason to turn it in right now, because they're promising that there'll be money in this buyback scheme later. And if you turn it in right now, you get nothing. So there's not a whole lot of people keen on turning these in. I suspect that the small number they've got has been people who, maybe somebody died and their family turned it in, or, something like that. It's going to be an unusual scenario. So I don't think that we're really, essentially, this is what the government planned, is that nobody turns it in until they get a buyback program lined up. And they haven't been doing that. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens, because they're rapidly running out of time. And it may end up coming, if they decide that they're not doing a buyback program, but they're not extending the amnesty, it may actually come down to them starting to kick in doors, because there's going to be a lot of people really upset about, I'm not turning it in until I get my money. And they may actually start sending the police to various houses to kick in the door and say, we want the gun, please. And
right. There's no financial incentive to turn them in right now, but there is still the sort of looming criminal threat of not turning them in. Perhaps everyone is waiting until April deadline to see what they're going to do with the buyback. And the responsible thing seems fairly obvious, that the government would extend the deadline. I mean, obviously, a lot of people would say the responsible thing is not to have a program like this in the first place. But if you're going to do something like this, the way that they've gone about it is particularly incompetent, it sounds like. And there is some, I would imagine that if you had this sort of jail time punishment and large fines, because it's several years in jail if you don't turn in the gun by April, right?
Yeah, and what you may end up seeing is if they take no actions, if they just say, hey, we haven't decided on a buyback plan, so I guess one isn't happening, but we're not extending an amnesty, you may actually see at the last minute a whole bunch of people rushing to turn these in, as well as a whole bunch of people going, well, I'm still going to wait for the amnesty and we'll just see how it plays out. That is a legally risky strategy, because, of course, how it plays out might be SWAT team kicking down your door, which I don't recommend. That's a bad life strategy. But
sure.
The police,
although I guess here's where what's going to be interesting for, I think, a lot of American viewers of the show here is in the U.S. I mean, the attitude among most gun rights activists, very active people, at the very least, is not to comply, not because there's no money, but because you don't agree with the policy in the first place, that you find that you would actively want to resist turning in your guns because, Americans fear confiscation means tyranny, essentially, and that you have less control over your own self-government. Is that sort of philosophy shared among Canadian gun owners at all? Like, is that something that's going to be a factor in this?
There's certainly some, although one thing that is fairly clear is that the whole point of a registration scheme, a registration system, isn't public safety, because I don't think that our gun registry has solved even a single crime. When they say, every time they trot out a crime as like, we solved one with the gun registry, it always turns out that it was solved some other way. There was one that they trotted out as a big, we got one. And they're like, yeah, when we checked this gun, it turned out it was registered to this guy who was the dad of the guy who robbed the bank. But it was also a small town, and this kid robbed a bank with no face mask on and was literally recognized and called by name by the clerk, who was like, are you sure you want to do this, Johnny? And So, when they tout this as a registry success, it really wasn't. They already knew who the guy was by the time they were doing any of these things. So it's not a crime prevention measure. It's a seizure measure. And there's going to be a lot of people thinking, well, if I, play around with compliance, if I don't comply, they're going to know exactly which door to kick in. So I think that's going to affect how many people are thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe not. That said, there's a lot of guns that are covered that aren't on any registry. And I think that compliance on that one is going to be substantially lower. There's going to be a lot more people thinking, well, they don't know I have it and I don't feel the need to tell them. There's also going to be a lot of people in that category who are not complying, not out of, I'm never going to go along with the government, but just because they don't know. There's going to be tons of people owning these things going, listen, this is my varmint gun. It's, it was my dad's varmint gun before. And what do you mean? Like, the government would never ban my stuff. There's going to be a lot of farmers and so forth who are just thinking, like, I'm never affected. A lot of the sort of FUD category, as the gun community will say, and
yes,
not realizing that they're covered. So there's going to be defiance through ignorance, I guess is the way to put it.